All right, you guys, welcome back to another episode on Ignite Your Glow, the podcast. And we are doing a traveling episode. That's right, we are recording on the road today, and I know I'm a day late, but I told y'all already we are in the messy middle. Now, that does not excuse the fact that y'all missed Tuesday, but I am going to get back onto it. Like I said, we are in the midst of a transition. We have been traveling state to state in this season, just because a lot of things were going on for me in my personal life. I know I told you guys a little bit, right, regarding, some of the hiccups of being in the messy middle, the transitions, managing the lessons, and all the things in between. And it wasn't just something that I'm sharing with you guys just to share, but this is really what I personally am living out as well in real time. So when I tell you guys that the messy middle is definitely the place where there is growth, where you learn to conquer fears, where you are able to recognize the value in what God has placed inside of you, let me tell you, there is a lot of strength and a lot of resiliency that is able to be built up in the messy middle. But not only are you rebuilding and reframing your own narrative, you're also getting an understanding of what your story is. See, earlier this morning, I was on a prayer call. And on the prayer call, we was also talking about the understanding of what it feels like to be in the messy middle, but not to sit there and call out shots on it just yet. Don't say shots fired when there are things that are going left and you don't fully understand yet. Because what God is doing is that you may be misinterpreting the movement that He's putting inside of you. You might just be misinterpreting the grace, the leverage that He's allowing you to walk in. You may just be missing the point of what He's trying to bring to your attention. See, sometimes God will allow us to go through seasons and times, rough patches included, right? So that way we can begin to recognize what was once a hindrance in one season. Why certain patterns or thoughts kept coming up in another season. Why certain pieces seemed like they wasn't really coming forth in the season. But it's not because God doesn't want you to get there, but there has to be a rebuilding that takes place. See, oftentimes, myself included, have felt that we was in a better place. We was in a solid place. And God had to show me that in this place of pressure, in this place that looks like mess, in this place that looks a little messy, He will give you an understanding of what you're really built on. What truly is your foundation in? Is your foundation in believing in you to be self reliant, or is your foundation truly rooted in the Word of God? Are you truly standing on His promises? Are you truly allowing Him to be the one that guides you and leads you and positions you for where it is that He's taking you? See, in the messy middle, you have no choice but to come face to face with yourself. It's almost as though you're given a mirror where you have to see who you really are and even the things that are hidden between the lines. And for me, one of the beautiful blessings that I have been able to witness in the process of it is understanding that I'm stronger than what I thought. Not because it was already necessarily in me, not because the strength came from me only, but because the strength came from what God wanted to do with me. He needed me to get to a place where I couldn't on my own so I could then regain and reestablish myself inside of Him. He needed me to get into a place where I could see all the pieces that were taking place and why certain thoughts and pieces were coming to mind and why certain contexts needed to be displayed. See, sometimes we have people, right, in our own lives, right? Family, friends, all the things in between, job, school, whatever the case may be. And we don't always recognize that there are people that may have been with us in one season that God is stating that something's shifting, something is shifting. But in order for you to begin to see the shift, you're going to have to recognize the pieces that are around you. Because I'll be honest, I was the person that thought that those who were around me were good, that we were solid, we were straight, we were solid, only to then find out that things weren't exactly as they appeared. That a lot of people's emotions, a lot of people's feelings, a lot of people's capacities were beginning to get exposed. And it took Him allowing me to be in the messy middle, to really move in the faith that He's been giving me, to be able to see the things from His perspective, and to understand why healthy boundaries and why healthy parameters are needed when it comes to sharing too much and talking too much or overextending ourselves. Because there's areas in our own lives that we don't recognize that, yes, we want to do all the things, but there has to be a balance. There has to be this flow. There has to be this movement that He brings forth. Because when we walk in His pace and His grace and His timing, The pieces begin to align different. Not because it wasn't there, not because the word wasn't spoken, not because he hasn't said it, not because it hasn't done just yet what it's called to do. But sometimes we have to get from under the mess to be able to really see what it is that God has been doing. Now, getting from up under the mess doesn't necessarily mean you're out of the messy middle, but sometimes it means you're finally able to see why your room needs to be cleaned. I think about the idea of dirty clothes. I don't know about you guys, but I've had kids, especially when they was younger, where their clothes would kind of be everywhere in the room. And listen, let's be honest here, myself included, right? And as clothes were everywhere, you don't recognize just how messy things really are until your perspective begins to change. Until you begin to take a look in your closet and recognize you have nothing else to wear. And then you recognize the floor has everything you've been looking for, but it's in you know what I mean, in disarray. The idea to me of when you finally come from up under the mess, you finally come up for air, you finally come up to breathe. And then you're able, and here is where you're now able to recognize what was it that was taking place the entire time. See, sometimes life, trauma, situations, circumstances can almost put, well, I'm going to say, like a cloak over us, causing us to not necessarily see everything. It's as though we're watching things, but we're watching things almost with a casting or something in front of us that causes us not to fully see everything in its fullest context or in the fullest color. Now, for full disclosure here, I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about me. But if you feel this, listen, drop it in the comments. Let me know that I'm not the only one here. Because I know for me, there's been areas in my own life where I started to recognize what was going on. It was almost as though a veil had been lifted. And I was able to see the mess that was going on. I was able to see how things were really in disarray, things that I thought I had together. And it was in that process that I began to recognize why God was separating me, why God was molding me, why God needed me to be more flexible for the season that I was walking into. I needed to recognize that it wasn't just rush the process, Jess, but it was allowing the process to process through you what needed to be processed from the beginning. Because now that the process is able to do what it needs to do, you can now become who you need to become. We have to be able to discern the thoughts and what God is doing. We have to be able to discern what it is that He's speaking, what He's saying, how He's pruning. Because not everything is exactly as it seems. Now, like I mentioned, this is from my perspective today. It doesn't mean that in a week, and a month, and an hour, right, so to speak, that the Lord doesn't bring forth a different revelation. But it gives you perspective that this is the way that I can perceive it for the moment based on where I am, given the set of information. And I share this piece with you guys for this episode because I know that I'm not alone. Being on that prayer call this morning, hearing from it from one of the pastors that I've listened to over the last couple of years, saying the same thing about this year and the heightened sensitivity of knowing that we are builders called to build despite the mess in the middle, despite the distractions, despite the naysayers, despite the mock, and understanding that there is something pivotal, right, about paying attention to what we listen to what we speak, to what we say, and to how we move and how we are able to discern the room that God brings us to. So many areas in our lives, God shows us how to be able to beat the odds. So many areas in our lives, God shows us exactly what is needed so this way we can pivot in the direction that He's calling us to. Sometimes we have to be willing to allow Him fully into the room. Now, it's easy to say, God, I got you. Come in, and let me walk by faith. But it's another thing to fully do it. It's another thing to be an active participant. This past season, I had to actively partake and what God was doing with me. And that was through reading, journaling, fasting, praying. That was in consulting with wise counsel. That was in not allowing my own thoughts and my own emotions to get ahead of me. That was in allowing the Lord to be the one that directs my steps, meaning there were certain days that I thought I had one set of plans and something else came about. And I'm like, God, but it's like, God, I trust that this is what you needed me to do today because I believe in my spirit that this needed to be done. And then allowing flexibility and room, meaning that it may not always look the way that I wanted it to, but I can trust Him to guide me. I can trust in him to lead me. I can trust in him to be by my side. I can trust in him to be able to say, Jess, this is the way that we're going. Or just let's make a U-turn here. Or just let's redirect here. Or just let's reframe here. Or just let's keep moving in the positivity. Why? Because exhortation is literally the encouragement that other people need. And I don't know about you, but I know for me that every time I'm in a messy middle, God always calls me to speak life. God always calls me to examine myself. God always causes me to encourage other people. Why? Because in that, I'm able to redefine what's happening. I'm able to redefine the messaging. I'm able to redefine the purpose of the call. I'm able to redefine what was going on. Because sometimes I could sit there and get in my feelings, think things are one way, and God may be looking like they was never meant to hurt you. But I needed you to perceive what was going on around you. Or it was never meant to hurt you, but I needed you to understand that at this junction, I needed you to shift here because there's something else I'm doing with you. That at this junction, I'm calling you out to do something different here. See, sometimes we get to areas within our mind, our bodies, our souls, where we want something done in a certain way, and God is like, that's not necessarily what we're doing, but I need you to be able to get into pace, to get into rhythm, to get into the rooms, to get into the places that I'm calling you to. Because sometimes if we allow our situations and circumstances to cause us to feel as though that there's not room to go further, we'll allow what should have been prosperous, what should have been moving, what should have been gold, what should have been a gold mine in some cases, to essentially be missed. Now, I don't necessarily mean that all like financially, but sometimes the gold is simply the Proverbs 31 woman, understanding who she is, who she's called to become, understanding the pivotal ways in which she's able to maneuver in seasons. That's why she's not afraid of the days to come, because she's been able to work out what it was that her ancestors couldn't do. She was able to work out the seasons that needed to be worked on. She was able to get before the Lord in a way that allowed her to be able to move different. And sometimes we may not necessarily recognize that because we're looking at things, we're seeing things, and we're looking at the value from a different perspective. And sometimes the value that we see things or perceive things from is a value placed on ourselves either by other people, or it's a value that we have given unto ourselves based on a set of pieces that the world has spoken. But I believe that God is getting us into this place where our value is not predicated by opinions of other people, thoughts of other people, trying to mansplain something or trying to please everybody. But that we're getting into a place that how we are defined is by how God sees us. That we are refined in the ways that God sees purpose fit for our lives. That we are able to then see the movement, right? The produce, the movement, the grapes, the movement, the abundance that God brings forth in our lives. And this is done through our day to day habits, our day to day routines, our day to day movement. Because we think sometimes that we have to do something super huge, super big in order to see the movement that God has. But oftentimes, what God is asking us to perceive is the smaller pieces. What can you do consistently every single day that births movement? What can you do every single day that causes moments to come forth? What can you do every single day that allows greater things to come in? He tells us in the word, right? Abide in him and he will abide in us. He didn't just say that to say that. He didn't just say that as a word just to be done and done in. No, he said that because there was a rejoicing that would take place. See, Proverbs 31:25, she says, I'm clothed in strength and I'm clothed in dignity, right? She will rejoice in the days to come. She's able to rejoice because she is able to see the birthing of what God is able to do with her in the process. She's able to see the movements, the challenges, the changes. She's able to see how God can take her from one fixture into a different version of herself. She's able to recognize that her movements leaded to moments, and those moments led to shifts that caused momentum to bring forth bigger change. She was able to see that she could be a mom, be a seamstress, be an entrepreneur, be a wife, and all these other loving things to the community. She saw just how much more God could increase inside of her when she simply operated out of the gifts, out of the talents, and out of the position of who she was called to be. She didn't have to pretend to be somebody different. She didn't have to pretend to be a rock star or this or that or the third. She simply operated in who she was. She was sit there and presented and called blessed because of who she was called to be. And for many of us, that comes with maturation. We come in this place sometimes where we want to agree with what other people have said about us. But God is getting us into a place where we come into agreement with what He has already spoken, what He has already stated, what He has already said. And that place of agreement allows us to then move in the aspect that God gives us. Room to grow, room to know that we are Proverbs 31 women, room to know that we are birthing out destiny in our wombs, room to know that we are raising our children in the ways in which they should go, according to Proverbs 22:6. That we are the ones who are sitting here being faithfully and fearfully, being wonderfully and fearfully made in the image of the Lord. Why? Because there is an expectation of how we are to operate and to be perceived, because we are moving with the grace and understanding that there is glory that we carry. Because we understand that what God placed inside of us is far bigger than what any situation we could have been through. And when we have that perception, when we see that break, when we recognize that modification, when we recognize those changes, when we recognize what God is doing, when we recognize what God is up to, when we recognize what God is doing, we are able to see differently. And sometimes that seeing differently is allowing the Lord to do what He needs to do in us. And honestly, that's something that I needed to fully register today. That there is movement that God is bringing forth in our lives that is allowing us to be able to be positioned to become the woman that we desire to be, to become the healed embodiment of vision, the woman that He has called for. Her, right? The woman who's healed, the woman who is able to embody the vision that God gave her, who is able to rest in the restoration that is upon her, who is able to receive the blessings that God has spoken over her, who is able to reinvent who she is and the images of what she thought about herself in her mind, to the books, to the places, to the things, to all the experiences she's had. There is a version of her that is coming forth, and there's a grace that is bestowed in the process. We have to allow ourselves to come out of limiting belief systems and coming out of what would be perceived as a limited capacity, and truly come into the agreement that there is a better framework, a framework that carries fruit, a framework that carries produce, a framework that carries grapes, that carries abundance, a framework that allows you to perceive and to see that there are witnesses who are waiting in the season for the very things of which you have. Listen, God gave me a phrase a few weeks ago, and it's not new, but I thought it was funny when I heard it. And the phrase was simple: you're not everybody's cup of tea. And the reality is that there's a reason why so many of us don't need to be everyone's cup of tea. You're not meant for everybody. You're not meant to be loved by everybody or to be liked by everybody. You're not meant to be necessarily even probably heard by everybody, because there's a voice, there's a tune, there's a word, there's something in you that is calling out to those who need you. People need you. They need what you're doing. 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 And in order for us, right, as believers, to really be able to gain control of what it is that we're doing, who we are, what's taking place, what's going on, we're going to have to sit there and reject the foolishness of life and receive what God can do. Because our lives, they're connected to other people. Our gifts, our talents, they're connected. When you think about the body of Christ, right, the human body, think about the head, the mind, right? Think about the eyes, the ears, the nose, all the things. Everything works with one another in conjunction in a certain manner. Now, my hands don't necessarily need my feet, but they are attached to my body. They are controlled, right, by my brain. So there is mechanisms that are necessary. And when we perceive that, we are able to then move differently. We walk differently. We act differently. We talk differently. We think differently. We modify. We change. We make changes in our lives and we move differently because we understand that what we are called to and who we're called to needs us. The earth needs what God placed on the inside of you, because it was never there just to be rooted in the ground and done. No, it was there to make roots. So this way it could then produce. It was there to be able to create roots so it can then go forth with fruit. But if you don't bear what needs to be bared, if you're not doing what he's asking you to do, how can it then give the seed that is needed? Every apple tree doesn't produce one apple, it produces many. Every apple tree that ever comes forth comes from a seed or seedlings, however that works, and then produces a huge tree that allows several more apples to be birthed, that allows several more seeds to come forth, and therefore there is an abundance that is able to then be spread. But if we don't get ourselves into that place, into that space, into that spot, so that these things could take place, how are we ever going to be able to see what God can do? It's not that we're making it happen. It's not that we're causing it to happen. It's not that we're the ones who are in charge. But it's the fact that God has something so special, so incredible that He's doing, that He needs us to be charged up in this season to do it so that way His flow can come from it. There's too much inside of you to allow it to remain dormant that hasn't come forth because you're dealing with the deposits of people who are not necessarily for you. God deposits wisdom. God deposits resources. God deposits all the things that we need because there's something special and spectacular that He's doing with us. And in order for us to be able to get a true understanding of what that looks like, we have to be able to recognize the identity in Christ that He has said has been laid hidden, or that He has said has been laid dormant, or that He may even have said has been hidden underneath all the former things, the other things, the lively things, the life things, the whatever stuff. But when we finally get into this place where we can shift gears and get into the face of God, the will of God, the plans of God, we move different. And that moving different allows us to no longer be hindered by the things of this world, but to truly embrace the grace that He has already set forth in front of each and every single one of our lives. And we have to be willing to accept the changes that are being made. Will you accept the change that God is bringing forth in your life today while you're experiencing the messy middle? Will you allow what He's doing to bring forth a better plan in your life so that you can experience the greater good that He has for you? Will you be willing in this season to set aside your agenda, your plans, your thoughts, your ways, your movements, what you thought was the expectation of the way to go about it, to then release that and to allow the Lord to really work in the plans that He has for you? He's not making plans of sand. He's making plans that are solid on rock foundation. So this way you can be on firm ground, on solid ground. He's giving you plans that are going to allow you to be able to be sustained, not to sit there and wonder where things are going to work out, but to be able to be established and rooted in Him. So will you allow yourself to be established in what God has for you and what God wants to do with you? Or will you continue to keep going at the rate that you have already been going? What will you choose to do today? And which pace, which rate will you go into? So, hey everybody, listen, I am Jessica M. Harris, your favorite empowerment coach. And I pray that this episode truly has blessed you. I'm ending it here because I think that that's a really good self-reflective pause for us to take note on. And I want us all, myself included, to really take some time to think about, will we continue to do what we're used to doing? Or will we sit there and take a leap of faith and do what God has called us to? He's given us the strength. He's given us the mindset. He's given us the purpose. Will we walk out in the identity